Marvel Rivals just released a new season, and with the new season they made 2 new characters, a new map, and possibly most importantly, their first ever hero balancing patch. So with that, I wanted to make this video to talk about the changes that they made, but also the changes they missed out on, and also the changes that they made but were not needed. But to start this video off, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the 2 new characters that they added. Alright, so let's get into the 2 new characters they added, starting with Invisible Woman. Her primary fire shoots out 3 bullets at one time, and does 20 damage to an enemy, and does 40 healing per bullet if it hits a teammate, with 10 ammo. Her first ability is Psionic Vortex that will last for 4 seconds, with a 12-second cooldown, and the ability will pull people in towards the center of the ability and will deal damage to anyone inside the radius. The next ability is Force Physics, and this ability will allow you to push back an enemy that hits or pull the enemies towards you. This is on an 8-second cooldown. And her last 2 abilities are a double jump ability, and an ability that will put a 300 health shield in front of one of your teammates, and you can go from teammate to teammate. However, she also has 2 passive abilities. One of them will make her invisible, and much like Sombra in Overwatch, she will be invisible until she uses an ability, shoots, or gets damaged. And her other passive is a special melee, where her 3rd melee in a row will push the enemy slightly back while still doing damage. And finally, we have her ult, which will make a round boundary and make it so people outside the boundary can't see the people inside if it's your teammate or if it's an enemy. It will also heal any teammate that is inside of it. It will also slow the enemies down that are inside of it. But overall, I think that they did a great job with this character's kit, and the only changes I would maybe like to see is making the ult slightly weaker, either by lowering the amount of healing that it does or by making it take longer to get. And the other potential change I would make for this character is like adding a timer somewhere on the screen so that you know when you're going to go invisible, and much like what Sombra had with her rework in Overwatch. And the other new character added to the game is Mr. Fantastic. His primary fire is called Stretchy Punch and has infinite ammo with a 1.1 second fire rate, doing 60 damage per hit with a range of 15 meters. Also with his primary fire, if you move your arm from one enemy to the other enemy, you can damage multiple enemies in one swing. And now let's get into his abilities, with his first ability being a shield, where he can expand and it will take 300 damage before he goes back to his normal form, or 3 seconds. His next ability will let you dash to either a teammate or an enemy. If you go towards an enemy, it will do a slight bit of damage. If you go towards a teammate, it will give you a little bit of shield and also give them a little bit of shield. This ability also has 2 charges and has a 5-second cooldown for each charge. But this ability will also give you 30% charge to your passive ability. Next, he has an ability that will grab an enemy that it hits. You can choose to dash towards the enemy, or you can pull the enemy towards you. And also with this ability, if you grab one enemy with one hand and another enemy with another hand, you can pull both the enemies towards you. And the best part about his kit probably is his passive ability, which charges 5% for every primary fire you hit, and once it hits 100, it'll turn you into a bigger target and also give you 450 bonus health, and will now be able to do 75 damage per hit for 6 seconds. Finally, you have his ult, which is a lot like Bucky's ult, where he'll be sent into the air and will land doing damage in a given radius, and it does 50 damage the first time, but every time you go again, it'll do 10 more damage. You go 3 times at the least, but every time you hit an enemy, it will go 1 more time, up to 6 times. And this character really makes me wonder why they wouldn't just have made him a tank, because they needed more tanks in the game and more strategists in the game, but instead they chose to make another DPS after making all these new ones. And I also think that they could have just made his passive ability last a little bit longer to make it more of a cooldown, and that way he would function a lot like Ramattra in Overwatch, with a weaker main body but a much stronger form that he can go to. And then also having it be like his main form will have longer range but weaker health, but his ability will be tankier and have shorter range. But that is just what I think, and I'm interested to know what you guys think about the character in general, and also if you think he should have been a tank instead of a DPS. So those are the 2 new characters that they added. So now let's start going over the changes that they made to the characters, and we'll go ahead and start from the top and go to the bottom, starting with Vanguards. And for Captain America, they reduced the delay time for his shield to be used again after his Living Legend ability from 3 seconds to 2 seconds. They also reduced his Liberty Rush cooldown from 12 seconds to 10 seconds, and they also increased his base health from 650 to 675. They also reduced the amount of charge for his ult from 3,400 to 3,100, and they also reduced the additional health provided to self after popping ult from 110 to 100. I think these changes are definitely a good start to making Captain America a more viable character. I don't think this will necessarily make him good, but I still think that they still need to slightly buff his damage, because right now he still can't do much as Captain America, and really just adding some damage will really help him, I think. Alright, so next is Doctor Strange, who they added a damage fall off for his Maelstrom of Madness ability, starting at 5 meters, reducing 70% at 8 meters. His other change is they slightly decreased the shield value recovery rate for his shield ability from 80 regained per second to 70 health regained per second. And I think this is a really good change for Doctor Strange. He definitely needed a change to his abilities, but I think that you could even lower the amount of damage even more for the Maelstrom ability that they already did right now. Now we have Thor, who they increased his base health slightly and also added immunity to control effects to his God of Thunder, which is his ultimate ability. ability. I think this is another good change. I just think that you might need to add even more health to Thor, or maybe just change some of that regular health to armored health, because I feel like he can still die really fast and can't really go in unless obviously you have a lot of cover and a lot of support. Next is Hulk, whose gamma shield health went from 250 to 200, and that is his only change. And I think this change was good, but I think they definitely need to change his team up ability with Iron Man and Strange, because that ability is still way too broken even with Strange nerfs. Now the final Vanguard that got changed is Venom, and they increased the symbiotic resilience bonus health that he gets from 1 to 1.2 per health lost. And they also buffed the amount of damage his ultimate abilities do, from the base damage being 40, now it does 50. And these two changes are also in the right direction for Venom, but I probably would have wanted to see also lowering the cooldowns of his abilities, primarily his swing ability, so that he can get in and out much faster and without dying. Alright, now time for the Duelists, starting with Black Panther. For Black Panther, they reduced the amount of additional health he gets after getting a reset from his Spirit Rend from 40 to 30, and the most amount of additional health he can have at one time is 75 instead of 120. I think this is a great change, and I think that if he continues to be too strong, that you could probably lower the amount of damage that his spears and dashes do, but maybe at the same time slightly buff his primary fire. Next is one of the weakest characters in Season 0, and that's Black Widow. They increased the range of her kicking ability from 3 meters to 5 meters. They also reduced the time required for Fleetfoot to recover from 0 stamina to full from 12 seconds to 4 seconds. And the final change that they made is they reduced the amount of time that it takes to fully charge her ult. I think these are definitely some good small changes, but I still don't think she will be a top character in the game unless they increase her fire rate. But also with that being said, I don't think they should change her into a one-shot character, because much like Widowmaker in Overwatch, she will become way too broken. Next we go to one of the most broken characters in Season 0 with Hawkeye. They slightly reduced the spread angle of his secondary fire blast arrows, and also reduced the triggering distance of his passive ability Archer's Focus from 60 meters to 40 meters. And they also reduced the additional damage of his passive from 80 to 70. I think these changes for Hawkeye are not good because he's just slightly weaker than he was before, for the most part because all they did was nerf his passive ability slightly, and he can still one-shot characters, so I think he's still way too broken. The good thing they did though is he's kind of less of a sniper, he's more of a close distance kind of guy, because he can't charge his passive ability from farther away. I think he'll probably remain one of the top characters in the game until you nerf his damage to a point where it won't one-shot anymore. But you know, at least they tried nerfing Hawkeye to make him a balanced character, but for Hela they practically did nothing, because here are our changes. Reduced the base health from 275 to 250. Nope, they lowered her health by 25 health. Not nerfing her fire rate, not nerfing her damage, not even nerfing her abilities. I mean, I don't really understand what the devs were thinking with this change, because she was possibly the most broken character in the game for Season 0. But instead of trying to make her balanced, all they did was kind of take away a little bit of health, thinking that they'd do their job. I just think they completely missed this nerf. They definitely should have also lowered her fire rate or damage, because she will most likely still be broken in this season. Alright, well I guess let's just get into the next character, and that's Magic. She got only one change, and that's to her ultimate ability, and they increased the amount of damage from 115 to 135 of her ability that dashes. I think this was a good change, but it's just one single change to one ability, so it's not really going to make her a good character. But I think maybe increasing her primary fire damage for her regular form and probably her ult form would definitely do the trick. Next we got Moon Knight, who got two changes, both to his ult. The first increased the number of talons generated during the ult from 10 to 14, and the other change is they increased the explosion radius from 4 to 5 meters. I think these changes were definitely perfect for Moon Knight, because I think he needed a buff to his ult, because his ult was a little too weak, and his primary kit was basically pretty good, strong, didn't need to get buffed or else it'd become broken. With that being said, I think you could probably slightly lower his primary fire damage if this is too broken now. Now we have another small change, and this is to Namor, where he can throw his squids and has much easier control now, so he knows where they're going basically. You can get them farther, and it's much better for his squids. So yeah, this is a good change, but it's really not much. But I think Namor was already in a good spot where you don't need to buff him anymore. But I think maybe lower the health of his squids, and that'll just help him not be as annoying, and you can still have him as a good character. Next we have another small change, and that's to Psylocke. It says her ult now checks her barriers, including Magneto's metal bulwark and Hulk's guard. And originally I didn't really know what this change meant, but I think if there's someone that's immune in her ult's radius, that she won't go for them and she'll go for someone else first. So if that is the case, I think that's a really good change, just to make the ult a little bit better. But also I think you could probably nerf her primary fire damage so that she doesn't get too broken. Punisher also got a really small change, and that was lowering his spread during his ultimate ability. And this is one where I don't think it was very necessary. I think his ult was already good, and I don't think you need to lower his spread for his ability. But I also think you could have nerfed his turret damage and maybe slightly buff his primary fire. Now I have Scarlet Witch, who got quite a few buffs, starting with her Chaos controls. Fixed damage went from 50 per second to 60 per second, and finally they buffed her secondary fire from doing 30 projectile damage to 35 damage. I think these are some good changes, but honestly I think that to make her even more viable, you could even buff her damage a little bit more. Storm is next, and she got a lot of changes to her kit. Her Wind Blade projectile speed got buffed from 100 meters per second to 150 per second, and left click damage went from 50 to 55. Her Bolt Rush damage got buffed from 70 to 80, and finally her additional health she gets from her ult moved from 350 to 450 bonus health. Now, I think these are some good changes, but I think they definitely went too far with these changes, and maybe nerfing the primary fire damage a little bit, or just lowering the amount of damage boost she gives with her ability would definitely be a good choice. Next is a great change, and that's the Squirrel Girl. The change that she got is that her ult will now bounce off to the nearest enemy when it hits a wall or hits some sort of object, and also now it has 300 health instead of 600 health. I think this change is perfect because in one of my last videos I said that her ult is really bringing down her kit. And with this change, it means that when the ult hits a wall or any other object, it'll bounce towards an enemy, so that way it's not just bouncing out of the fight and it hits like one person and then it's out of the fight for the rest of the time. But also nerfing the health makes it a little bit easier to kill it, so it's not too broken. Winter Soldier also got a few changes, starting with them increasing his bonus health he gets from 2 of his abilities from 30 to 40, also increased his primary fire damage from 70 to 75, and also reduced the area damage of his primary from 70 to 65, and reduced his damage decay from 65% to 60%, and finally they increased his base health from 250 to 275. And these are more changes that I don't really like, mainly because Bucky was already an A or maybe even S tier character. Now you just buffed him even more, giving him more health and being able to do a little bit more damage. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense to me why you'd buff a character that was already strong, but oh well. And now to finish off the Duelists, we got Wolverine. We got 2 changes. They increased his base health from 300 to 350 and reduced the damage reduction ratio provided by his Undying Animal ability from 50% to 40%. I think these changes are also unnecessary just because he was already a good character. And I think if you were going to change him, I would say slightly lower his tank damage that he can do and buff his regular damage that he can do to like lower health enemies. Especially since this change won't make him broken, but it'll make him so he's better in more situations. Now for our first healer, who is Cloak and Dagger. And they got some changes that I also feel like are probably a little bit unnecessary. Starting with her first change, which is they reduced her Dagger Storm cooldown from 15 seconds to 12 seconds. And the other change is a change to her ultimate ability, where she'll now have 4 dashes instead of the 3 dashes she had before. But like I said, I feel like these are unnecessary. She was already a good character. I think the change to her ability is alright, the cooldown change. But I think the change to her ultimate was really very, not needed, because her ultimate was already good. Adding an extra dash really just makes it a little bit broken in my mind. With that being said, I do like these next changes to Jeff the Landshark, starting with them buffing the amount of healing that he can do with his primary fire from 140 heals per second to 150 per second. And then just other change is they lowered the radius for his ult for how much it will eat. But I think these changes are perfect because Jeff wasn't necessarily the strongest healer, but his ult also felt probably a little too strong and also annoying at times. So they nerfed the ult and gave him a buff to his regular kit, and I think that's really good. I think you could probably buff his healing a little more or buff his E ability for like the bubble heals a little more. Next we have Luna Snow, who got a pretty small change, and that's just that now when she's in her ult, she can't switch between healing and damage instantly. It's now a 0.5 second delay between each. I think this is a good change just because you can't spam it back and forth now, and you have to wait a little bit before you can go back to damage from healing. And I also think that if you need to nerf her even more, which you probably do, nerfing her primary fire healing would probably be the best thing to do. Next is Mantis, who has a pretty weird change, and that's just they lowered how fast she can run with her passive ability from 2.5 meters per second to 1.5 meters per second. And I feel like this change is another one that's just unnecessary. I think lowering the amount of damage boost she can give or the amount of healing that she can do would be a much better change than just lowering how fast she can run, because she'll still be one of the most broken healers in the game. And the last character to get a change is Rocket Raccoon, and they buffed his healing secondary from 60 heals per second to 70 heals per second. And I think they did a great job with this character because he definitely needed some more healing capability, but I think you could definitely buff his primary fire or just lower the spread for his primary fire so that he can do more damage at more ranges. So those were all the changes that they added to the game. And I think that there are some good changes spread throughout there, like the Rocket buff and the Scarlet Witch buff. But ultimately, I feel like overall, the first patch of the game was really just a miss. Because if you look at the heroes that were broken in Season 0, like Hela, Mantis, and Hawkeye, none of them really got nerfed to a point where they won't still be broken. And on top of that, they buffed a lot of characters that were sitting in a really good spot where they weren't too broken but were still good, like Bucky and Cloak and Dagger. So I think that if they release a mid-season patch, or if not the next season, but they should definitely nerf a lot of the good characters, because otherwise the meta will start to stay the same and become stale. It could end up a lot like what Overwatch's situation was in Overwatch 1. where you have these metas that you never change up and people start to get bored and then go off to look for a new game to play. For example, their goats meta or double shield meta. But with all that being said, I do want to know what you guys think. So comment below what you think they missed out on, but also what do you think they got right in their first character patch. And also I wanted to add a plug at the end of the video of I stream Marvel Rivals at twitch.tv/Chubakara, so I'd appreciate it if you checked it out. And also I'll have my Discord linked in the description, so if you want to go play some games with me or just want to have alerts for when I go live or post a video, that'll be all down there. And finally, obviously don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, because it means a lot to me. And thank you all for watching.